Hey everybody, hello, thanks for joining us. My name is Hilary Hutcheson. I'm a fly fishing guide up in Northwest Montana, and I'm a member of the POW Athlete Alliance. And I'm psyched everybody's joined. I have Heather Hansman with me here right now because today we are two river people who are going to be talking about the role of water and climate change. So hi Heather.
Hi, how's it going?
So this is an awesome topic for us to be talking about because not only are we both river enthusiasts and use the river for work and play and all of our passions, but we've been on a big river together. We'll be able to talk about that a little bit more too. But I think like it's kind of been a slow burn, like a long time coming of just getting tons of information about rivers and being able to share new information coming in all the time, and then lots of opportunity for action. So the role of water and climate, our topic today. Definitely appreciate Fat Tire for bringing that to us because we need water to drink beer, to drink a lot of different things. So thanks to Fat Tire for putting this topic on for us today. And I'm psyched because this is the first time I've got to see you for a super long time. I think maybe I've only seen you once skiing since the time you saved my life.
That trip feels like such a big deal to me. We were on the Middle Fork of the Flathead together, and I did pull you out of the raft when we flipped a boat. But
yes.
The thing that was such a big deal to me is that I have never been good at fly fishing, and I caught so many fish on that trip. And then we got off the river, and I was like, "Oh, I'm great at this." And
I thought you. I was
like, I'm not great at fly fishing.
No, I thought you were. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you didn't fish a ton because, yeah, you caught a ton of fish and you were super good at it. But yeah, I think that trip was marked by you saving my life for sure. Yeah, Ryan Thompson and I flipped in the first drop of spruce, and we were just churned like in that whole river. You guys briefed it. Like you guys went through first, and we went. And we had a couple other paddlers with us, and somebody like hit their paddle on a rock or something and didn't get a dig, and then we flipped. And I remember Ryan and I were just like in the whole upside down raft, holding on to the gear net. And my knee, I'm super short, so it's easy for me to hold my knees up, but I had wading boots on, and like they were just ripped off the soles of the wading boots. The water was pounding, and then I lost my shorts. Like my shorts. Well, because I had filled my pockets with heart rocks like the whole time, which, I probably shouldn't be taking any rocks around there. But I found all these hot rocks and had them in my pockets. I'm like, oh, that's it. That's the headline. That's how I died. Bare ass naked, pockets full of rocks, and in the river. And then how are people saying, she wanted it like this.
Yeah. She was doing what she loved, collecting rocks. We get to talk about rivers again. We're kind of back.
Oh my gosh.
It's not as good as being on the river. It kind of feels like it.
No, I know. And I really hope you get a chance to get back out here, whenever, kind of the coast is kind of clear now, but it might be weird for a while. So open invitation, whenever you can get back here, please do. But in the meantime, for those of people who don't know, you are a former raft guide, which we talked about then. Like, you guided on the Gully and the New, right?
I did. I actually started guiding. I'm from the East Coast, and I went to college in Maine, and I started guiding on the Kennebec and the Penobscot in Maine. Then I moved to Colorado and started guiding out there. I moved back to West Virginia for a little bit. So I've ping-ponged. It's funny, my mom is now, I spent 10 years basically like guiding and thinking around and living in my car. And now that I've kind of like moved into a different venue of dirtbag life, my mom is like, all that raft guiding paid off. Like it's like, you know what you were doing the whole time.
You're like, I knew what I was doing.
It was totally a plan. It was intentional.
No, that's true though. I mean, a lot of people say all roads lead back to the river, and kind of the river I know has been a road for you, and has definitely been a road for me as well, which is just kind of a cool way to get down through life, is on that kind of road, which is the river. I think it's so cool to move on a moving surface, like with skiing and other things, you're kind of moving on a stable surface, but there's something about moving on this moving surface that is super fun, obviously, but this crazy metaphor as well. So, and now your road has led you to this awesome book downriver, and maybe you can tell people about it. I've just started reading it, and I love it so far. And just spoiler alert, it is an adventure story. To me, this is how I'm taking it, as an adventure and an odyssey, but with all the information that I feel like I need or want. That if it was only adventure and only odyssey, I might be kind of left wanting more, but this was like super helpful, informational, and a guide really so far to me. And I'm not even done yet, but I'm really digging it.
Yeah, you just like explained it better than I could, I think. But yeah, the book, it's called Downriver, and it's about the Green River, which is the biggest tributary of the Colorado. And people call the Colorado River the most overworked river in the country. It doesn't even make it to its delta. It's, it's water for something like 40 million people. It's like more than $1 trillion in economic activity. It's this huge force in kind of the Western US. And it's totally overallocated. It has basically been overpromised since it was divided up 100 years ago. And it impacts everything. It impacts food, it impacts recreation, it impacts electricity, it impacts like how we do everything in life. And the green to me was sort of like this interesting slice of the Colorado, because it's sort of like the redheaded stepchild. People don't really pay attention to it. It starts up in the Wind River Range in Wyoming and drops down through kind of southern Wyoming. It goes into Colorado for a little bit, and then ends up in Canyonlands. That's where it meets up with the main stem of the Colorado. And over the course of that trip, that river, it kind of starts up in agriculture land. It runs through cities. There's gold meadow trout fisheries. It goes through 2 national parks. It kind of like has everything I think of a river as having, and it's totally overtapped. And I'm somebody, I've been a rock guide for a long time. I'm a journalist. I'm somebody who like thinks about natural resources. And I still felt really, really confused about why there wasn't enough water to go around, and how water was broken up, and who got what, and why. You hear about these fights about farms versus fish versus cities. And I just like couldn't wrap my head around why those fights were there, and why, you kind of hear this like, California is in drought, the river is shrinking, the reservoirs are going down. And even though I was someone who's invested in that, I still felt really confused by it, and I wanted to know the story.
Right.
And I kind of figured out that the best way to do that was, like from the river, which is kind of the best way I know how to do anything. So I set up this kind of boondoggle trip to float it from the headwaters up in Wyoming down to Canyonlands. So the book is sort of like the bones of the book is that trip, and then kind of the meat on it is how those people use water and how they do and don't get along, and sort of what the misconceptions are. And then on top of that, how climate change is making all of that stuff harder.
Well, as a river person, it'd be easy for you to just kind of write about like how beautiful it was and how much fun you had. But something that stands out to me, because I know you're a journalist, so I know that your mind's always going and looking, kind of into these questions that you have, and knowing that you can talk to the humans, is the human aspect of this whole issue, the human aspect of water's role in climate change, because you just spoke about how it's flowing through these economies and the lifeblood of the people, as opposed to just being something we're using for recreation. And, POW being founded in snow sports and on the snow, you and I are acutely aware that we need that snow for the water, but then you end up with all this emotion, like all of these things are happening, how we need it for commerce to move goods, how we need it for agriculture, how we need it, to make things that we are, need every single day. Maybe not every, well, yeah, every day.
It's every single day.
A little more now. But there's a lot of emotion in that. And, you're an award-winning journalist for a reason. I've read your stuff for a really long time, and it's fun to read somebody who can write about skiing and find that human aspect. And so that's something that I'm finding here. Maybe you can talk a little bit more to people about that human aspect of water and climate change that you discovered.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that like, you're right. That's like the heart of all of it. And I think sort of like, I don't know, like as a reader, sometimes maybe I'm a little bit lazy, but I don't like the stories that I know that I connect with the most are the ones where they have a people or a person at their center, that are about humans. And I think that is one of the things that's kind of tricky about water stuff in general, is that you look at numbers and reservoir levels and acre feet, and it just like for me, it makes my eyeballs roll back in my head, even though I care about it. So I wanted the story to be really about people. And then kind of a cool thing about journalism is that it gives you this like agency to just go up to strangers and ask them about their lives, which is something I really took advantage of in this. And as I moved downriver, I was on the river for kind of like 3 to 9 days at a time. And then I would stop and sort of talk to the people. I had some interviews set up ahead of time.
Right.
And water is such a tricky one because water is so embedded in our lives, and water also means something different to everybody. And what it means. And I got my bell rung pretty quickly kind of on the trip about my perception that rivers are for floating on and we should keep as much water in the stream as possible was just this really narrow-minded way of looking at it. And right off the bat,
people who you didn't expect really to run into, who kind of gave you a different perspective.
Oh, totally, yeah. And that right off the bat, the first kind of people I met along the river were these cattle ranchers who had been, a lot of them, their families had been there since the 1860s. And, I kind of came up and was like, beef isn't that important. We need to figure out, blah, 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 keep the river, water in the river. And immediately these people who have spent so much time on the landscape and with the river and who have this really sort of intuitive and also really detailed idea and sense of how much water is on the landscape, how much water in the stream means, there's habitat for birds or endangered species. This idea that water is not just one thing, and depending on your kind of investment in it and your line in, you kind of perceive it really, really differently. And those people aren't wrong. That's the hard part in this and in a lot of resource issues is nobody's wrong. Everyone's just coming at it from a really different direction.
Well, yeah, because it's your home water. So when people's homes are so different, your home water means something different. People regard their home, the resources that they have in their own homes, no matter where they are, in cities or mountains or valleys or whatever, differently. And when there's water involved, that's your home water. It's it's a big deal. And I try to be careful with that too, because I have my own personal passions and opinions about my water, but it doesn't do certain things, that other people's water does. I'm on a freestone river, I'm not generating a lot of power or things on the Middle Fork of the Flathead, stuff like that. So, it's interesting to learn about what other things people have to go through in order to have the relationship.
It's so easy to take it for granted. I think that's why water is so interesting, because the water that you're floating on, or the freestone headwaters that you're floating on, and the water that comes out of your tap when you make coffee in the morning, those are the same, but they're also totally different.
Well, it's hard to get past the point that it's not magic.
Yeah.
Woo, magic.
Kind of the way I've been thinking about it a lot is you have to think about the river as a plumbing system and the river as a habitat, and you have to lie those two on top of each other and hold those both in your head, which is really hard. It's not it's not easy. But yeah, so you grew up on the river, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it cracks me up because there's so many kind of cliche things about water for me around here. The river runs through it. Many of us joke about how Brad Pitt gave us our jobs because after a river runs through it came out, everybody wanted to go fly fishing. And then at that time I was in high school, and I was a raft guide like you, and our raft company kind of had fly fishing, but it wasn't really the big. Rafting was the major thing that people were coming for. And then suddenly the movie came out and everybody wanted to fly fish. My sister and I could fly fish, so we started taking fly fishing trips, and I'm still here. So it's funny, there's kind of these funny things that have happened over time where people are connected to water and rivers, and I've always kind of been right here in that, feeling it, and just kind of seeing a lot of crazy change happen throughout that time. I mean, I've always lived on the river, always just gravitated towards it, and can always just throw a stone on it. I'm in a very lucky situation where I can go on the river every day.
Especially right now. Yeah. What are you thinking about now, or what are you working on now?
Well, literally working on, we've, had this great pause where had some opportunity to do some more creative projects instead of just guiding. I'm a full-time fishing guide in the summer, but our season in the wintertime. We're not taking fly fishing trips with people. So I work on a bunch of creative projects, and I've got a movie coming out. Actually, I swear I didn't steal your idea, but it's very similar in terms of
down to narrative. Like I dreamed it up, and I was like, this is actually not that creative.
No, well, after reading as much of your book as I've read so far, I'm like, ooh, this is really good. I hope that my film kind of strikes people the way that yours is striking me. But my film I'm working on with Liam Gallagher, a friend of mine who I actually got to guide rafts here with way back in the day. He's now a filmmaker in snowboard industry and in fly fishing industry, and so he and I teamed up for this idea that my partner Eben came up with, which was following a drop of water from the continental divide all the way to the ocean, because I was really struggling, kind of like you were, to picture these things that are happening with water as they're going through people's livelihoods and communities and economies and affecting their health, and so many things that water are doing for and to us, and things we're doing for and to it, and just kind of, I needed to see it. I needed, I always say I needed like a close-up look, and that's just kind of,
it's so hard when you're removed from it.
Even though it's right here, I had to like get into it, and I wanted to see the whole thing. And your resume in Whitewater, it goes all the way across the country. Mine is mostly here, just in the West. And, I needed to get a broader view, to go and see the entire thing, like what's happening when it gets down to the Columbia River Gorge, like what's happening all the way. And so it definitely talks about the economy of water, for sure. And so it's also an adventure story. We snowboarded with Jeremy Jones, founder of POW, from the top of the Continental Divide, hiked up and started to find that drop. And the drop is this, it's funny to me, like, when I always have to picture things, I was thinking of that cartoon. I don't know if you're probably way too young for this. On Saturday morning cartoons, there was this like PSA about how a bill becomes a law.
Like, I'm a bill.
I'm a bill. It was like a cartoon
Totally,
bill.
yeah.
Like, I'm a bill. And it kind of shows the process that this, bill goes in to become law. And it's the same thing I feel about this drop of water. I'm talking to a lot of people about what's happening out here with our climate situation. And, I'm at the crown of the continent where all the glaciers were, and we're seeing these changes happen. So kind of the story for me, and I think we actually have a tease that Liam sent in to watch. Yeah, but to kind of preempt it a little super quickly, when I was in college in journalism school, we had a practice doing interview class, and it was for television journalism, and we had to like set up the studio with the chairs a certain way and do the lighting and do all that stuff so that we could practice doing an interview. So we had to bring a subject from somewhere into interview, and I took it really seriously, which was kind of embarrassing because everybody else was like grabbing a cheerleader or like getting their roommate to come in. And I got Dr. Dan Faegre, who is the chief climate scientist at the USGS, and he happened to be in Missoula at the University of Montana working on the launch of the Terra space satellite. So like bring in this mega scientist to do like this really low level interview.
Freshman
and I start just asking him stuff about climate change and what's global warming and like, these really basic things. And he starts rattling off all of these predictions that he had based on science that he could see happening over the next 25 years. And so that was almost 25 years ago. And now I'm in my 40s, and being on the river, I've literally seen those things happen that he predicted have actually happened, come to be. And so that's been torture. Yeah. That's been brutal for me.
Science is scary. Like looking out in the future predictions, like I know in the Colorado, it's predicted to stream flows could shrink by 50% in the next by the end of the century. And like that's bananas to think about.
Bananas.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah.
And so that's like the conflict, is because like here we are enjoying it, and like I feel like I'm exploiting it to a certain extent, like making money off it as a guide and trying to get people here, increasing pressure, whatever. So just trying to get a closer look and see what's really happening and learn more is kind of how we decided to do this.
Like this is something I think about a lot, is like it's hard to care about things you don't care about. And like, people need to and like I feel like that about rivers and about snow. Like if I wasn't personally invested, it's so hard to like it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So I think that like, I think that storytelling can be a really big part of that.
Yeah.
Can we see the film?
Yeah, and there's a little clip in there too in this tease where I actually reunited with Dr. Faegre 25 years ago. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't
remember you?
Started crying. I was like a mess because I'm like, you remember me?
You changed my life.
Yeah, you changed my life and all those things you said. And I was a mess. And we got to hike up and look at some glaciers together. And so it was like it was a huge honor for me, but it just all came back, the things he said to me. Yeah. And then after having them see what's happening, now it's like, okay, I'm freaking old. I'm out of time. Like, we have got to like do something. So, well, trust me, I'm feeling every single day since I turned 40. I wake up, I'm like 90. So it's shoulders.
It's like a river is such an interesting metaphor for that, I think, because it's like you can physically watch the change, like season to season, day to day, even like as you go downstream.
Getting old, yeah, totally. All right, let's see if they have it. If they can, if they roll it, let's see if it works out. Yeah, I don't know. It's the first time I'm seeing it.
Yeah. Ooh, you haven't seen it? Yeah. Does it feel like that's got to be exciting? I'm so not a visual person that like that kind of other side of it, like getting the final impact. Oh, here we go.
Well, a couple decades ago, I was told by one of the world's top climate scientists that my world would change and that I'd be able to see it happening just by following the water. And now I just want a closer look at the actual journey that a drop of water takes through glaciers and the snowfields and the rivers and the reservoirs, all the way to the ocean. And I'm just curious, what if we join the drop and meet the people whose economies are impacted, their livelihoods, their health, all along the way? Can we find climate solutions in action? So we decided to start from the top and headed up to the Continental Divide.
And you think of how many people's lives have been shaped around this water that starts here.
You know, on a microstructure scale, really small scale, there's a lot going on with that tiny little frozen snowflake. It's an incredible journey when you really think about it.
When you want to understand the system, you look high. You look in the alpine areas, because what happens up there literally cascades down through the rest of the system.
To think about your watershed as like this great accumulator, you know, it refines and concentrates all the good and all the bad. It tells the story of that place. The river tells the story.
Eat it, eat it, eat it. Oh, there he is. Oh, fuck. That's a nice one. But we kind of know what's going on now. It's just, are we willing to make the changes, right?
The realization hit that like these fish are going extinct. Like this is stuff that's right in my backyard. It became a little bit more of a mission at that point.
This is just the beginning as far as collaborative conversations, and there's so much potential for positive impact. I just feel like the sky's the limit.
My message would be get involved, be aware, vote for change.
People protect what they love. It's our responsibility to ensure that the next generation not only has that opportunity, but also wants to protect it because they love it.
Yeah, so that's coming out in the fall. That was
the river tells the story. Oh.
Liam crushed it. Yeah, Liam did a good job. The thing that was cool about watching that is, like I said, I hadn't seen it before, but that kind of all comes back. I'm sure it was the same as when you kind of saw your finished product of your book. It was like, oh my God, all of those little things that happen throughout that journey.
You like forget the pain points, but you also forget like all the good things. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Cool.
How is that? What are you thinking about coming out of that? Like, what are the kind of like action points, or, you know, like the thing is coming together? What happens now? Or like, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, thank you. Like that, when I first, you know, asked myself that, and I have this, you know, awesome team, Eben and Liam, and I kind of go out, and then we, like you, found these people along the way. And the idea was just to kind of explore and see who the drop met and what would, you know, what happens to the drop of water, who does it encounter? And that's what we wanted to do, is kind of go along with it on that journey and find these people. So we did, like you, find people we didn't expect, and found a lot of opportunity there, but without giving really everything away. The most important thing that we found was that people are interested in mobilizing their own communities for whatever reason that might be. So like how you had talked about, different people are motivated by water for different reasons. The water's impacting them differently. But what we found overwhelmingly was that because that was important to them, they wanted to mobilize their community. So they were giving us ideas on like how to get people active and involved. So for example, it could be this small town just nearby me that only has 400 people in it, and their school won a $10,000 award, eco award, and they were able to kind of transform how their town was mobilizing together in order to kind of survive, you know, and kind of stay afloat, you know, just being kind of the small low-income town. So they gave us a lot of ideas for how to do that. And then the Climate Kids on the Coast, and then guides along the way. So many guides who are doing everything from kick plastic in new ways, like finding new ways to kind of motivate their clients into making good choices, to voting. I mean, that was people, you know, we all talk about getting out to vote, but like these communities were giving us new ways and reasons to mobilize people to go and vote, which was awesome.
A lot of times, a lot of what I've seen that's sort of like the most, because it's so easy to like get overwhelmed and feel like it's so heavy and so impossible to do anything, especially when you think about sort of like climate change and like shrinking stream flows. But in terms of like solutions and like creative ways to think about it, I feel like those really hyper local, like, okay, we're looking at our resource, then we can kind of spread it out bigger. Like on the green, they're doing some really creative like water sharing, water banking. Like how can we kind of like use, I think multiple use is like the word I always go back to, but like how can we sort of overlay all these impacts in a way that like is the most like, you know, conservation sort of a tricky word, but like in terms of conservation, everyone's sort of like using their piece on top of each other, and instead of infighting, it's sort of like, okay, what are your needs? What are you looking at? How can those like dovetail with mine? And I think that like, I think it often has to start to blow things up to kind of like the federal level. It has to start small in a lot of ways, I think, because water is such a local, like it means something so different kind of regardless of where you are. And I think the thing, like, what does that actually look like on the ground when people are touching it? Like, what does that mean is such an important question.
Right. But they are, like you said, you're starting small in these communities. They are realizing that systemic change is the key. I mean, that's kind of what I found is like, okay, they're doing these things, but they are realizing that they do have a voice at a higher level, which is awesome. And, you know, I mean, in a lot of ways, just being social in different ways, like through social media and face-to-face, and now we used to do a lot of big events, and you could use maybe a film festival to kind of get people together and psyched. But now that we've had to, you know, cancel a lot of those types of things this spring, now they're coming together kind of like this, like different ways to stay connected. And I think that's been really cool in order to talk about changing the system, talk about systemic change and kind of getting things to happen at a high level, which so that we can continue to do them in our own communities, has just been very, very cool.
And I think that like that idea of talking to people who are like outside of your lane and outside of your bubble, like for me, that was the biggest thing that I got personally out of the book trip and the whole thing, and also feel so important and so relevant right now, when you're like, just because somebody thinks different than me doesn't mean that they're wrong. Like, just because somebody thinks, like, for instance, flood irrigating is super controversial. Like, just because somebody's flood irrigating and has done it for 100 years, like, doesn't mean that they don't have a reason for doing it or that they're an idiot. And I think that applies to, like, so many things politically right now. But I think it's so, like, you don't know that until you engage with the people. And I think that that's part of, like, I don't know. I think, you know, like, we both have a journalism background. I always go back to people and stories. And, like
I know.
if it's like a human, if it's like Hilary, the fly fishing guide, like, that's such a different angle on, like, some Jamoke in Montana says that we should stay off the rivers in the afternoon. You know, like, if there's a person, it gives it such, like, so much more weight.
Yeah, the Hudal is kind of a way for people to tell their stories. I know when we're fishing and it's super hot and we're out all across different places in Montana, and you start to see people just get off the river on their own at 2 p.m. Hudal conditions means you have to stop fishing by 2 p.m. after it's been 70 degrees in the water for 3 days straight. And that's just to take pressure off of the fish, because you know, the mortality rate goes up when you're fishing when it's really hot. And we've had that for year after year after year after year all across Montana. And so people start to kind of adjust their lives around here, kind of around Hudal, and listening to their stories about how their kind of lives are changing around fish has been cool. But in your book, I would like to hear you talk about your relationship to water all the time. But what you end up doing is, like, telling other people's stories, because you're a storyteller. How do you think, and why do you think it's so important to do that with climate?
And I think it's, like, exactly for that reason, because it's otherwise it feels so removed and so, like, not, you know, like a turn on the tap. It's not tangible. And I think when I thought about writing the book, I thought a lot about, like, what kind of books I like to read and, like, what engages me and what I actually enjoy, and what, like, because I really wanted it to be something that people, like, my mom in Boston could pick up and, like, be interested in, and not just, like, womp womp water facts. And to me, like, the things that I love to read are always human stories with, like, a strong narrator. And I think that to me, and obviously, like, I'm biased because this is my job, but I think that's kind of, like, the most powerful way to get people engaged with sort of, like, the sciencey facts and the big picture abstract. Like, okay, if the reservoir levels go down, what does that mean for me? Like, people are always the end. And, like, you need to give, in thinking about storytelling, like, and I feel like I learned this being a raft guide, because, like, you have these days where you just have to, like, entertain people when it's crappy out and you're in the back of the boat and you just have to, like, keep telling stories. But there needs to be a hook. Like, you need to give people a reason to care. And, like, in the movie, we protect the things that we love. And, like, you need to, like,
I don't know. You should have called your book "Womp Womp River Facts."
You guys want to that joke?
Yeah, no, that's funny. Well, I think we actually are getting questions from people. So here's one for you. What was your biggest aha moment on climate when you were on downriver, when you were writing it?
That's a good question, because there are a lot. I feel like in every sort of, like, venue I showed up in, there was something that I was like, oh man, I had never thought about that before. What was the best? You know what I think it is? And this is sort of climate, and this is also sort of just, like, how we manage natural resources. And there are two big dams on the Green. There's the Flaming Gorge Dam and the Fontenelle Dam, and they're both mainly used for water storage. There's little electricity that comes out of them, but mainly it's about how they move water downriver and how they make sure people get water when they need it. And I'd kind of come into this, like, oh, dams are bad, we should take down all the dams, let the river flow. And I went and I called up the guy who operates the Fontenelle Dam and was like, hello, I'm a journalist. Can I come talk to you someday? And he was like, yeah, you want to come in an hour? And so they opened the dam for me, and I drove my little hatchback with all my gear in it down there. And this guy took me on a full tour of the dam. We went out, and I kind of was like, so what do you do? Like, tell me what you do and why you do it. And he was like, you got to think that, like, every piece of this is connected. And, like, people out there, like, smack talking dams, but, like, they don't realize that I'm carefully letting out the exact amount of water that they need. And I think that piece, that, like, everything is so linked together, and you can't just pull one thread and fix the problem. Like, it has to be, you have to kind of think about the system and think about how do my actions impact somebody else? How are the, impacts downstream coming down to me? and like not assume that, you know, somebody that you don't really understand is like, everyone for the most part has a reason why they're doing something. A lot of these impacts,
Right.
you know, like the way we use things has these cascading impacts that we don't think about. And so it's sort of, there's no,
Well, especially in a
What's that?
climate, because, well, I was just saying it. So, and I'm just now thinking of this based on you telling me this, but it seems especially true in a changing climate because we don't necessarily have those glacial reservoirs that are doing the slow drip all the time that can hold it. What we're experiencing here is kind of an earlier, bigger and over sooner runoff. And so it's so interesting because it's easy for me to, you know, criticize dams because it used to be a beautiful river and now there's reservoir. But now I'm like, ooh, like, are they going to release? When are they going to release water from here? That, you know, you start thinking about it in a different way, and just all of your truths or all of your narrative has to have new consideration.
And it just like climate just sort of like turns the screws on on the system that we've been working on. And I feel like the way I've been thinking about it is like, okay, we have to just kind of like take what we have now and try and do better. Like we can't blame the past. Like that doesn't do you any good. Like you got to assume that people in the past were trying to make like the best decisions they could. And like we have these dams now, some of them we can take down, some of them we have to manage. You know, like there are cities downstream that depend on water. We don't want to go back to the human thing. We can't cut people off from water. Like we have to be really, in a sort of hotter, drier climate, we have to be so hyper conscious about how the pieces fit together. And that's local level, that's federal policy, that's like how we do international agreements. Like it's so, I mean, I could like spin myself up talking about it too much, but like there's so many pieces that I think like you know, talk about climate change, it's really about how the pieces sort of continue to fit together and how we layer those uses on top of each other. And yeah, and how we deal with the reality of like, we might not have those glacier reservoirs soon.
I like the hopefulness that I'm hearing from you too, in terms of, you know, let's trust some of the people, you know, who are we're either putting in to do the job or have been appointed to do the job, or at least listen and consider, especially when kind of they're the experts, you know, because they're, you know, we can disagree on tons of things and that's totally great, but just learning and listening is such a huge part of, I know what your journey was and mine too in this film, and kind of finding that common ground, because there also is common ground.
Yeah. And I think that is, and like rivers are such interesting common ground too. Cause I think that like, or like, that's what I found, that if you, and I was really nervous in a couple of these situations, like kind of dropping into some rancher's property, or, you know, like talking to the fish biologists who were like these sort of like rednecky guys in the middle of nowhere. Like, I was really nervous kind of being like, hi, I'm this raft guide from Seattle. Will you answer my questions? But for the most part, like people were so generous and so willing to talk to me and so ready. I think a lot of times they were like, nobody had asked them, especially from kind of like, you could say like the other side, like to be able to kind of come in and be like, hey, I'm curious about what you're doing. Can you tell me this? Was such a door opener, I think, instead of being like, here's what I think, like, here's what I think is the way things are doing it. Why are you doing it this way? But I think coming in, you know, like I was surprised at how easy it was to find common ground with people, I think. And I think the river.
Well, that's cool because we have so many other things to disagree on. It's neat to think that you can have people who can disagree on so many different things that in this situation, we don't need to talk about. We can just kind of come together to protect water for the needs that we've identified. You know, that might be similar, they might be different. The bottom line is that like kind of together, you know, we can vote for water and protect basically our families and our livelihoods and our communities and our health. That's what the common ground is that family, community, economy, health, you know, those bottom line fundamentals are all driven by water. So we're like, hey, buddy.
Literally everybody needs water. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. So on your big trip, how long did it take? The whole.
I was on the river for about 3 months, and that was like, you know, I'd be on. It was so awesome. And I had, I think the longest stretch I was on was 10 days. So I'd be on, and the way that permits worked out, I would like, you know, sometimes have a chunk of time to be dinking around in like Vernal, Utah, talking to people.
Yeah. How long did it take you to, did you say Vernal, Utah?
I'm very familiar with the public library and the Sharkers and the Rec Center.
That's awesome. There's great fishing around there. Did you fish along the way?
I didn't, because I didn't get a fishing license in the different states. But right below Flaming Gorge Dam, there's this like huge, gold medal trout fishery. And the day that I put on there, the river was super high. They were like releasing a ton of water out of the dam. It was kind of like the first real rapids I was going to hit by myself. And my aunt had come out to kind of like help me shuttle. And so she kind of dropped me off at the dam, and she couldn't park there. So she kind of like dumped me in the parking lot with my, pack raft and my bag of gear. And then was like, cool, I'll see you in 5 days. And I was by myself. I was so freaked out. And there's like a couple of big rapids downstream, and there were all these fishing trips launching. And I kind of like walked around the put-in and was like, who might be nice to me? Who might like
I love it. You're like, hey, I caught a few big fish.
I was like, you guys.
How was the water quality? Did it just kind of change throughout your trip? Was it like highs and lows, different?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like sediment's a big deal in that river, and you can see it like right below the dam. It's so clear, and like right in the headwaters, you come out of the lakes, and it's super clear. And by the end of that day, it was muddy and cloudy. And, sediment's kind of, and salt is its own issue. But the only real quality problems on that river are, I will like take back my statement that everyone is trying to do good and like everyone's trying to find the best use. Because in a lot of cases, there's a lot of extraction, especially in the Uinta Basin in Utah. In a lot of those places, there's abandoned oil and gas wells. There's, people who have drilled and then not really, their tailings ponds are dripping out into the river. There's been a pipeline leak on the river. And so that's kind of the only, if you're going to pick a bad guy in this situation, I think that kind of extractive industry is the bad guy.
Yeah, they have so much opportunity to make good choices. It's just kind of this kind of get in and get out mentality that I think that a lot of people, river lovers, put pressure on them to change. And I do believe there are good people in those industries who have that opportunity.
And I think, back to the sort of like water is economics, water is community. And in a lot of those places, those are the jobs. And in a lot of Vernal's actually a really interesting one because there has been sort of this like growing guide, fishing, rafting. There's the biking's gotten pretty good there. There's sort of this like growing recreation industry that's starting to bud, which is such another like kind of interesting piece of the whole water story. I mean, for you, like what does that look like for you these days? Like, how are you guys, how's fishing going, like, in a warming river system and in terms of, like, global pandemic? That sounds like a dream question.
Couple things. Yeah, for starters, there are very positive things across the country that this kind of great pause has done for fish in the fishery. So that's undeniable. I mean, there's some just kind of taking pressure off of spawning fish and off of just rivers in general, taking the pressure off and giving kind of the planet a break. There have already been kind of a lot of places that are showing evidence of potential strength of their fishery. It could be something that may be done in the future. Across the world, there are places where anglers are advocates in kind of making a pause for maybe even a couple months or maybe a year or two on certain fisheries just to kind of regain their health. So that's one thing. But the main thing that I noticed was as a fishing guide and as a raft guide, like we're really suited for this. Like we actually are strong, and you're having to scramble all the time. Like, constantly having to be strong and tough and together. And so that's something that I found through this in the fishing community and fly fishing and just with our businesses has been very clear. It's just like, come at me, bro. Like we got this for sure. We can do this. And
no supply.
And, yeah. So yeah, I mean the truth is that a lot of our businesses struggled just in having, like, I own a fly shop here in my town and we had to have it closed in the spring, which is pretty brutal. And that's when like tons of the fishing community sprang up to like buy things online or just, book a trip for next year so that we have their deposit, like, just kind of different things to keep mom and pop business afloat. And same thing with guiding. Like a lot of people are booking guide trips for 2021 and 2022 ahead of time, just to like give that guide the.
Yeah, oh, that's really cool to hear. Yeah, I mean, it's the same with media. Like it feels really sort of scary to people.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. No, I bet. Yeah. So it's like, we're not going anywhere. Like, for anybody out there, they can continue to go on rivers if they're kind of thinking about putting the river first. I mean, I know for you, just knowing you, that it's about the water first and about us, after that. So I think as long as people can kind of get their heart and mind in the right place and kind of put the water first, then we can have a really freaking good time. And, potentially make some money and support our families. And as long as we just take care of it first. I mean, that's our stead. Like, that's the cost of doing business. Like, I mean, that's what we have to do.
I think you're on the river.
Yeah. No.
There's no to end on, or is that a depressing note to end on?
Well,
I was saying, is that a good note to end on, or is that a depressing note to end on?
Yeah, no, that's good. No, it's a hopeful note. Like, talking to you, and reading your book makes me want to get out there, meet more people like you, kind of remember, what it's like to have fun out there, and be together and understand the river together. And when I say be together, it's just like that common ground that you talked about throughout is just like, we have to do that. Like, we can do that. We all have this in common. We can show up together. We can get out together. We can have a great time, on the river, wherever we may be.
And I think stories are really important right now for that. Like,
huge. Stories are huge. Like, and look, we could have done a whole hour on just our ridiculous river stories. I mean, that should be a thing. Like, we just, I mean, no, I know. The technical pieces on water that we have to talk about are important, but man, that's where everything happens is on the river. So we have to be able to get together and talk about it. But, well, I think that you and I will probably be in the same place next week, because we're going to wrap this up, but we'll come back to watch Conrad Anker and Ben Wessel. They're going to have next week's talk as part of the Outdoor State of Mind. And their topic is how elections may change during a pandemic. And Ben Wessel from Next Gen is going to be the expert on that, with Conrad hosting. It's going to be awesome. Like, those are so many of the important questions that we're asking that these guys will be able to give us some insight to. So I'm really looking forward to that, because that's kind of why you and I are talking about everybody getting together on water, is to vote.
And that's Thursday, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's this Thursday. Yeah, not next week.
What day is it?
I don't know. That's
our week is so tricky.
I have no idea. No, it's so this Thursday. So if people want to watch it, they do the same way they did this, which is go ahead and join the Outdoor State. And it's just so cool that we've got 50 million people. It's the biggest state, in the country, of people who are outdoor enthusiasts. And, we're this outdoor state. So join the Outdoor State, and then you can kind of watch these guys talk, and it's going to be awesome to learn a little bit more about our options and what might happen and how that impacts us and our choices. So that'll be a good one. Yeah. Well, man, I don't want to go, but we got rivers to attend to.
I got a chance to talk to you.
Yeah. I know, it's awesome to see you. I can't wait to see you back on the river.
Back on the river.
Yes, awesome. And I'll go finish your book.
Report back.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that does it for us. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Super fun, and we'll do it again sometime. Thanks, Fat Tire. Woohoo! Cheers. Cheers.